Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, Ben, Lynn, and Turk were at the Integrated Crop Management Conference at Iowa State University this week. They update us on information they learned. Hear about tar spot, red crown rot, SCN and SDS Correlation, and the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman. Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have our regulars, Turk, Lynn, and Ben, and all three of them just returned from Iowa State University at Ames and attended the Integrated Crop Management Conference and have a lot of new information to share. So we'll start with Ben.
One of the classes that I sat in through was Allison Robertson. Dr. Allison Robertson is the plant pathology disease department, and she typically specializes in corn, where Darren Mueller specializes in soybeans. And she had a really interesting talk. Everybody, obviously, the big buzzword that a lot of guys are talking about in the disease world is obviously tar spot. And we've covered tar spot a couple times on Cup of Joe, but one of the things that I found that some of the work that she had that was very interesting was the timing of application for tar spot and gray leaf spot actually are in two different realms, because gray leaf spot actually starts in both diseases start in the lower portion of the canopy, but gray leaf spot has a tendency to spread really quickly. So if gray leaf spot is what you're actually targeting, and that's the disease that you were seeing out in the fields on the very lower leaves of the canopy, an earlier application has a tendency to an earlier application at V12, so prior to tasseling, has a slightly higher rate of return than what spraying at tassel or R1 would be giving you. So I thought that was interesting. I'd never had somebody differentiate timing-wise on which disease you're definitely targeting. Now I think most guys probably wait till tassel and pull the trigger, because that's...
Or maybe even a hair bit after, depending on timing.
Because of that's what the available time is a lot of the time too, to get the retailers, to get the planes in the field and to get the spraying done. So and vice versa, that the most economic, highest return on investment for spraying for tar spot is the R1. Did you sit in on any classes where they talked about I know there's another fungicide class on tar spot. Did they talk about sequential applications, multiple applications?
Yeah, there was a little bit of a discussion on that. The biggest issue that they had with tar spot is that, and this was coming from Purdue, so they did not show any economic gain by just a preventative, I guess, application of a fungicide. You actually had to have the tar spot out there. It was like a $25 difference between spraying without and spraying with. And the biggest thing that they said is to go out when you're looking at the plants and make sure that you actually have tar spot and you don't have insect dung, I guess, for lack of better terms. But the thing with tar spot is that once they saw one, come back a week later and the whole leaf was basically infected. And when we get to that point, it's managing where it's at in the plant. They were talking, it was like up to 85% of the leaf could be damaged, but if it wasn't the ear leaf, it wasn't that big of a problem from an economic standpoint. But once we had anything on the ear leaf, I mean, you had to manage it right away.
Ear leaf and above.
Correct.
Yep. So once you're in the bottom portion of the canopy, it's not as important. But what Allison was also talking about is you have to have 2 continuous days of soil wetness. So you have to have the heavy fogs or dews in the mornings and the right, the disease triangle.
Correct.
That is what's going to make the difference between a very, very bad year and a very, very, where you can see the disease, but it's not going to affect the yield as much. Also having a second disease in the canopy has a tendency, guys have talked about, when you have that second disease in the canopy, has a tendency to hurt yield more. And it was actually very interesting to see Southeast Iowa Research Farm was one of the spots where they could actually get good ratings on and good readings from their different fungicide efficacy trials, because they actually had a fair amount of disease in the Southeast Research Farm. But what was interesting is when you look at some of the other locations, I think that there's a difference in the different breeding programs that are out there and the different genetic suppliers, because some of the ones that weren't seeing very much response were definitely out of one camp, where a different set of genetic suppliers, you definitely were seeing
Correct.
more susceptible varieties and better ratings on what fungicides are out there. So,
and the interesting part about all that is that when our universities and even our private folks are looking at tar spot, they have to have basically the inoculum occurring in the wild, because they can't replicate tar spot in a lab. Mm-hmm. So when we do all this, they have to basically naturally get that inoculum. And we saw it when we looked at that plot not too far away from the research farm, that particular area was really hit hard by tar spot. So from the farmer standpoint, that's not exciting because that's right in our backyard. But from Iowa State and their research, they found that very exciting. So,
correct. That kind of leans into the second disease that they were talking that has quite a bit of news in the headlines right now, and that's crown rot. And the inoculation for crown rot is kind of similar to what they found for what they can do with crown rot is what they can do with potentially with tar spot. Is they can't make it in the lab. But what they can do is they can go out and pull all these samples, grind them up, and they have to basically inoculate plants that direction. And crown rot is something that's been around for a long time. We've seen it. It causes ghosted plants. Basically, the little portion of the corn plant, when you split it in half, that makes a V, where all of your basically V1 through V6, where your apical meristem is at that point, is you start to get hollowed out, brown, discolored pith in that area. And when the plant goes to finish filling the ear out, you can actually see ghosted plants where the corn plant prematurely died. And there's definite economic yield loss associated with crown rot, but nobody knows what actual causal fusarium species it is. So it's like, okay, it's been around forever. We kind of thought we knew how to handle it, but as technology advances, we have the ability to dive into what the individual species are. And now they're trying to figure out which species are the ones that are causing the most damage. Like there's different isolates, there's different colonies of the fusarium species out there, and that's what basically they're ramping up and getting ready to start another 3 years worth of research to figure out what is the actual causal agent of crown rot, and how do we fix it.
Will the FMC Xyway product have any effect on crown rot?
In the trial runs that they did on their efficacy, I don't believe they showed positive or negative impact on crown rot. I'd have to go back and look at my the pictures that I took from the slides, because that's the other thing is we have a couple of the slides, but we don't have all of their slides as they finish their publications and they finish their research. They have the ability to publish some of that stuff, but it's not. That stuff isn't public information yet for them to be able to release those. So they said basically by the time that they do the Crop Advantage series, which we have the first week in January in Burlington that we help sponsor, they will have a lot of that publications that's actually released that you can get your hands on and look at the different, number one, the efficacy of each individual fungicide that they're using, plus some more of this other data. So in sense, it would, if with how that product moves through the with how that product can translocate through the plant, it would make sense that if the active ingredient is good against a fusarium species, it would make sense that product would have some efficacy against it.
And they both mentioned the Purdue talk and then Allison that Xyway, we definitely need to look at a sequential application of fungicide, because by the time tar spot is at an economic problem, most likely the Xyway has lost its efficacy against fighting any disease.
But it definitely helped keep the plant protected up to that point.
Correct.
And that's why they also think that the V12 application isn't as good against tar spot as the R1 application, is because when the economic time when that plant starts to defoliate or cause the plant to senesce earlier, you ran out of your 4-6 week residual, and you really need that last 2 weeks to help the fill process.
Correct. And they're looking around August 5th, I think, was when they were both doing their looks. Around R5 is when they're doing all the evaluations. So,
correct. The other thing that I had here in Dr. Darren Mueller's report that he had out, he spent quite a bit of time talking about sudden death and some of the different trials that they had for it. More information, like I said, once we get to the Crop Advantage series, we'll be able to get some more of the data that they had there. But I thought it was very interesting that he said that we've always known that there's a correlation between soybean cyst nematode and sudden death, but we aren't quite sure if it's an infection that causes the disease to be able to get into the roots, and they have very good data now that suggests that it is not the infection. Actually, SCN will chew on root tips, and those root tips will then cause that plant, because it's an apical meristem, it's a main growing point, to cause lateral branching from those. And they know that now that the infection point for SDS is infecting those lateral roots, those smaller root hairs, and it's because there's more forks, it's because there are more smaller lateral roots is what the causal relationship there is. So if you can figure out how to manage your SCN more efficiently, which we always known about, but this is going to be an even heavier push from my end, looking at Peking varieties, which we have a whole bunch to choose from this year that look very promising. That's very, very cool. Or products like our Trinemco and Saltro in our starting line plus seed treatment. If we can lower those numbers, we will reduce the amount of root rot that you see from sudden death syndrome.
So manage nematodes, and the byproduct is you're going to be managing your SDS levels then too.
Correct.
That's great. And then we also had a key meeting with Syngenta a week ago, and they have a Generation 2 Saltro in the works, so which appears to have even greater capacity to control some other diseases besides sudden death and nematodes and root knot nematode.
Correct.
So products are going to keep better as we keep fighting these pests, and of course learning how to manage them is the key to higher yields.
Yep. I had one other thing that I wanted to mention here from Darren's talk. We all kind of know that the Phytophthora genes, we've talked about field tolerance versus the genes many times, but when you're looking at definitely just the genes, there are the haves and have-nots. And we know that the 1A gene has been around the longest, so it makes sense that there is a certain amount of resistance that has been built up in the Phytophthora species to that. The numbers that they released from this year, and I'm not sure if this is Darren's data, it's the University of Illinois data, and the University of Illinois compiled the data, but it's from Iowa, Michigan, Nebraska, and South Dakota. And from the 1C gene, they look at 70% of the plants that were tested. They have some amount of virulence or resistance built up to it. So 70% can basically build Phytophthora on 1C genes, 70% can build Phytophthora on 1K genes, and 2% can build on 3A genes in the state of Iowa. So I'm just using the Iowa data, but I'll put that up there so that everybody can see what that looks like in some of the other states. But really, if you have a huge Phytophthora issue, it's time to start looking into products that have 3A. And I know the Trumans are one that have 3A. The Austins are a Phytophthora product that have 3A. There's a handful of products that we have in our lineup.
And you can also battle it too with higher levels of different seed treatments to manage through the seedling stage. You're not going to get season-long control. You got to have the particular gene. 3A is obviously the best, RPS 3A, but a good heavy load at the on the seed treatment can get you through that initial infection period too.
In most of the Phytophthora that happens, most of the issues that we have are not late season issues. You got to have the right weather conditions and from the 7 years that I have been paying very close attention to the soybeans in my job here, there are very, very few instances where a plant will die off when it's knee high. Most of the time you are trying to protect them in the time frame that you're talking about.
Right, and the Phytophthora species has to literally swim to the root. So you got to have waterlogged soils, and that's when you have the Phytophthora. And it's not that generally, it can be in spots in the field because of where it's waterlogged, or it can be random plants. And that could play into your percentages. You know, you say, well, one plant doesn't get it, but one right next to it does get it. So Phytophthora is always a problem, and we see it every year.
Yep. So those are a few of the highlights that I had for this week.
Yeah, one of my big takeaways was the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative. So it's an initiative that's taken part through public, private, and then commercial field operations to look at the optimal nitrogen efficiency when we look out in the field. So the hot topics right now are around climate change and carbon credits, but they were talking that potentially the next one is going to nitric oxide reduction. Carbon has definitely had its place, but now we're going to start looking at nitric oxide as a potential supplement cash source for our farmers to look at. So Iowa State is getting involved in this. Nebraska has already started to do this through technology and from a sprayer standpoint or an application standpoint, spatially through satellites, different drones. So the future that we're looking at here that's pretty exciting is how do we finitely manage our nitrogen, and there's a lot of buzz, I guess, in the academia world that is leading to this. So if people are interested, they are looking for trial cooperators, go to Iowa State's website and look up the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative. If that's something that you're interested in, there's a bevy of information there, but it's something that is looks very promising from a standpoint of a takeaway that's going to have an effect for generations to come. And I thought that was interesting in the Nebraska one, just to segue out of this, is that they let the growers do their grower practice, and then they let them, or made them, do the geospatial or the sensing. And most of the testing, they either were right at or slightly below what the grower practice was from a yield standpoint, but a net return to the operation was higher in every case. So what they're finding is that we can go through our fields and optimize our nitrogen use and actually add to the bottom line. So that's pretty exciting from that standpoint.
I don't know what the Iowa State one was, but like Nebraska, when you say they were a little lower, it was like a bushel or two.
Correct.
But they were cutting down from like a 9.9
Correct.
pounds of nitrogen down to like 0.64 or so for every pound of nitrogen they have out there, you get a bushel back. It's like for every 0.64 pounds of nitrogen that you're putting out, you're gaining a bushel back. So they're just really trying to narrow the margins and be efficient with what we have.
Like the whole testing segment, I think most of it was in between 20 to 50 pound reduction in their nitrogen use. So
would have been a nice 20 to 50 pounds or $20 to $50 per acre with last year's nitrogen costs. And
then the last one I thought was very interesting. As we look to next year, the key takeaway I took through the crop outlook for the recap of 2022 was, even though we were dry in a large segment of Iowa and some parts of Illinois, we are bailed out by our water table, and we continue to have these extremely dry end of the seasons. But it's our water table that is, keeping us in the game, which makes sense. But kind of figure you're that dry, we should see some negative consequences. But for the time being, we complain about the wet springs, but they are recharging that water table. Unfortunately for us here in Southeast Iowa, it seems like we catch it at the wrong time. We want to recharge that maybe over the winter, not right in the middle of planting season, but. To our folks out to the west, that water table basically disappears, and that's where we see the crop failures in the southwest Iowa into Nebraska. As you move closer to the Mississippi, get in the Des Moines River corridor, we have a very, very high water table in comparison. So as we move forward and managing our crops, that's definitely something to keep in mind here. We're in our 5th year of below average precipitation, so just be cognizant of that. It was almost, they were predicting 35 to 40 bushel advantage on irrigated ground this year in those environments.
Well, moisture is important, but too much is not good either.
Yep.
Yeah, also in that, I think it was in that presentation they were talking about what's an inch of rain worth during the summer months, and that's, again, it was a depends answer, but in general it was 20 bushels per inch, that if you get whatever rain you get from June to August, June, July, August, in that time period, each inch of rain was worth 20 bushels a acre.
Yeah, that's what my grandpa always said, $1 million rain, but he's probably a little low in today's inflated dollars.
And it could be as high as, again, if you get that rain, if you're dry and you get that rain right at pollination, it could be worth 45.
Wow.
So, but in average, it was about 20 bushels.
Yeah, and across the state, it was just incredible how we were able to manage our yield. Central Iowa was like 8.53 inches of rain for the growing season. And we were as a state able to keep a 202 bushel average. So once our water table goes, then we might be worried, but until that point in time, our varieties and our hybrids are taking advantage of below ground moisture to help push them through.
And the guys out in Nebraska are putting in more and more irrigation all the time, and even western Iowa. And along those lines, Chad Hart was talking about the profitability of corn and soybeans right now, and the cost of production is what, $5 I think he had.
Yeah, that sounded right.
And right now we've got you can book corn for $5.70, so there's 70 cents a bushel profit, and that converts to pretty good numbers. So, and same on soybeans, I think it was $13, and you can get 14. It depends on where we end up here. It's just a lot of things going on. It's that time of year where one headline really moves the markets, it seems like, and whether it be the river levels are being low and our forecast to continue to go lower here now as we get into a drier portion of the winter or year through the winter months. But it's South America can be a big headline, as we know. The anything that happens in Russia can be or Ukraine can be a big market mover. But yesterday's market mover seemed to be the announcement of the EPA's proposed renewable fuel standards. So they're proposed. They're not final yet. And so I guess the long and the short of it was the ethanol came out very happy with the proposals, but the renewable fuels industry was not very happy with the numbers that were proposed in there. As a matter of fact, the proposed numbers for growth in the renewable fuels industry, once the plants all get online, they're going to be higher than what their numbers are. And so it really doesn't make any difference as far as I'm concerned. The renewable fuels industry has the demand for the product, and that demand from airlines, the trucking industry, on and on and on. The demand for their renewable fuel is going to be probably greater than their capacity to produce it, in my opinion. And so the government can say whatever they want to, but the demand for their product is going to be strong and will continue to do that. So these are proposals. I assume they're all going to be adjusted before the final rule.
Chad said that the soybeans were the more stable product from an export standpoint, and from a longevity standpoint of seeing above $13 beans. Soybeans are going to be the more stable product out of the two.
Yeah, and that's really when you're looking at the supply, the demand, and the fact that corn's more profitable than soybeans right now, but and they're projecting a lot more corn next year. So it's the chances of it going down, corn going down, are probably greater than soybeans going down. But it's still dry. We still need rain, and we still have no idea what South America is going to do, or China is going to do, or anything else is going to do. But eventually we'll use more of our soybeans in the U.S. Because we always know that our livestock feed is going to take half of it or more than half, and the rest of it could very well be used in the U.S. for fuel production.
Well, I'll see if I can attempt to do the corny jokes a little better this week. Nothing wrong with last week. I mean, I'm not in any way suggesting that it was bad, but again, I'm going to tell you something about myself that you guys probably don't know. Back before I got into the seed business thing, I was a lumberjack. I don't know if you knew that.
Did not know that.
Did not. I cut down 19,330 trees. How do I know I cut down that many trees? I kept a log. Sorry about that. All right, Ben.
That's a good one.
All right, Ben. I always want to throw a horse joke in there for you and Morgan. So okay?
Appreciate it.
Okay. What did the horse say after it tripped? What did the horse say after it tripped? Help! I've fallen and I can't giddy up.
Yep.
All right. One last one. Okay. Now, the World Cup soccer. I know the United States aren't the greatest soccer fans, but hey, we had a big win against Iran. So I thought I'd throw a soccer joke in for the World Cup. Okay. Why was Cinderella so bad at soccer? Why was Cinderella so bad at soccer? She kept running away from the ball.
Yeah.
That's a good one, I think. Anyhow, enough of that. Thanks for watching this week. We hope you and your family are healthy and safe, and we appreciate your business. And don't forget, it's time to order seed if you haven't done it already. And we'll see you next week. Take care.